Welcome to new episode of Boring Psychology for Sleep. If you're lying in bed, eyes heavy, mind still turning, you're not alone. This space is for you. There's no pressure here. You don't need to understand everything or stay fully awake. You're allowed to drift. You're allowed to breathe. You're allowed to rest while still listening. Tonight, we're not going to talk about anything too urgent. No goals, no fixes, just a quiet conversation about something that's more common than we like to admit. Self-sabotage. That moment when you finally start making progress, and then somehow, something in you pulls the brake. You ghost a message. You delay the work. You skip the thing you know will help. You pick a fight you didn't need to pick. You walk away from something right when it's starting to feel good. And you don't always know why. Maybe you call it laziness. Maybe you say you're just tired. Maybe you tell yourself, I'll try again next week. But underneath all of that, Carl Jung believed, there is something deeper. He once said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Self-sabotage, in this view, is not a failure of willpower. It's a sign that part of you is operating behind the scenes, a part that doesn't trust success, that doesn't feel safe with peace, that secretly believes you're only lovable when you're struggling. And tonight, we're going to walk through that, not to solve it, but to gently understand it, like watching clouds pass across the moon. Quiet. Patient. No rush. Because sometimes, just understanding where a pattern comes from loosens its grip. Let's start soft. Think back to a time when things were going well. Really well. Maybe you were being noticed. Maybe something you worked hard for was finally starting to grow. Maybe you felt loved, seen, understood. And then something shifted. A fight you didn't expect. A choice you regretted the moment you made it. A small act that undid weeks of effort. And part of you may have asked, why did I do that? That's the question this whole episode sits inside of. Why do we do that? Why do we hurt ourselves in subtle ways? Why do we sabotage connection, creativity, progress, even happiness? Jung believed it often begins not with failure, but with fear of change. Your unconscious mind is wired for familiarity. It will always choose the known discomfort over unknown joy. Because the unknown, to your nervous system, can feel like danger, even when it's good, especially when it's good. If you grew up in chaos, peace can feel like a trap. If you learned to earn love by suffering, ease can feel suspicious. If you were ignored when you succeeded, part of you might avoid success entirely, just to stay safe. But here's the important part. Self-sabotage is never random. It is always protective. Misguided, but protective. Somewhere in your emotional memory, there's a reason why holding back feels safer than moving forward. and we're going to visit that part of you soon. Not with shame, but with soft curiosity. But first, let me tell you a story. One that might sound like fiction, but holds something very real inside. In a quiet village, tucked between two cold rivers, there lived a watchmaker named Elian. He was gentle, meticulous, and known for making the most delicate clocks. Clocks so precise, they could almost breathe. But he never finished them. Every time he neared the end of a beautiful design, when the final piece was ready to be placed, when the gears were smooth and the balance perfect, Elian would stop. He would close the clock, set it on a dusty shelf, and begin another. His house was full of clocks that never ticked. The townspeople adored his work. They begged him to sell just one. They offered coin, trade, even gratitude. But Elian would only smile and say, "It's not ready. It might fail." One day, a child from the village wandered into his shop. She pointed at one of the silent clocks and asked, "Why don't they speak?" Elian paused. "They could," he said quietly. "But what if they say something wrong?" The girl tilted her head. "But they're clocks. They just tell the time." Elian looked at her, then at the rows of beautiful, silent machines. He had never thought of it that way. You see, Elian wasn't afraid of failure. He was afraid of what success might say about him, that he was worthy, that he was seen, that he mattered. And that was unfamiliar. So he chose silence, just like so many of us do when we avoid speaking, starting, finishing, loving, or resting. Even sleep can feel unsafe when you're used to tension. That's why we keep scrolling, why the silence feels too loud, why we sabotage rest the same way we sabotage peace. But we don't have to judge that part. Tonight, you don't need to fight it. Just notice it. Just breathe with it. You're not broken. You're protecting something you haven't fully unpacked yet. And that is okay. In the story of Elian, the watchmaker, we saw a quiet truth. He didn't sabotage his clocks because he hated them. He did it because finishing them would mean facing a new version of himself. One where he was visible. One where he was trusted. One where he could no longer hide behind almost ready. And many of us live like that. Carl Jung often said that the most dangerous thing is not the shadow itself, but our refusal to look at it. And so tonight, let's softly look, not at the shadow with fear, but with patience. When you self-sabotage, it's rarely about laziness or weakness. Underneath the surface, there are often 3 subtle beliefs hiding. Beliefs so old and so familiar, you don't even notice them anymore. Let's unfold each one, slowly, like pages in a quiet book. The first belief is this: if I succeed, something bad will happen. It sounds irrational, but it's common. Success means visibility. And if, somewhere in your past, visibility brought pain, judgment, jealousy, abandonment, then your unconscious may associate achievement with danger. You might feel anxious when things go well. You might withdraw just as someone's getting closer. You might delay finishing something, not because you can't, but because part of you remembers the last time you were seen and how it hurt. So your mind says, let's just avoid it altogether. No pain, no risk. This doesn't mean you're weak. It means you learned survival before you learned safety. And now you're being asked to unlearn it. Slowly. The second belief is this: if I change, I'll lose love. This one is soft and deep. You may have been loved for being quiet, easy, helpful, small. And the idea of becoming bold, honest, successful, even peaceful, might feel like betrayal. What if they don't love this version of me? What if I outgrow them? What if I become someone even I don't recognize? And so you hold yourself back. Not because you don't want joy, but because you don't want to lose what little love you have. Even if that love comes with conditions. Even if that peace isn't real peace. Jung called this the conflict between persona and self. The persona is the version of you others accepted. The self is the version of you that's waiting. And sometimes they don't live in the same room, but they can. One day, when you let go of the fear that being yourself means being alone. Now, the third belief is one almost no one says out loud, but many people carry quietly, especially at night. I don't deserve good things. It's not a thought. It's a feeling, a heaviness, a quiet refusal to let joy last. You get close to love, and suddenly you feel like an imposter. You feel seen, and then feel the urge to disappear. You finish something meaningful, and convince yourself it wasn't that good. Why? Because somewhere along the line, you learned that pain was safer than pleasure, that struggle earned respect, that suffering meant depth, and that ease meant you weren't working hard enough to be valid. So you sabotage not to fail, but to return to a place that feels familiar, a place where your identity is still intact, even if it's uncomfortable. And that's the heart of it. We don't sabotage because we hate ourselves. We sabotage because we're protecting an old self. One who was taught, this is how you survive. But maybe you're not surviving anymore. Maybe you're ready to start living. Not in big, loud ways. Not in dramatic shifts. But in small ones. In brushing your teeth, even when your mind says, why bother? In showing up to your work, even when no one's clapping. In letting someone love you, even when it feels unfamiliar. In changing your shirt, drinking water, lying still without needing to fix everything. That is healing. That is success. Self-sabotage fades not by force, but by understanding. You don't need to fight it. You only need to meet it with curiosity. Ask, what part of me is afraid right now? What memory does this moment remind me of? What would I do right now if I believed I was already enough? You don't have to believe it fully. You just have to be willing to try. Let me tell you what Carl Jung might say if he were sitting beside you now. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. And part of becoming means releasing the patterns that once protected you. When you begin to untangle the habit of self-sabotage, things don't suddenly get easier. In fact, they might feel harder at first. Because when you stop fighting old patterns, they don't disappear immediately. They protest. They whisper back. That old part of you, the one who was trained to fear joy, love, or success, doesn't know what to do with peace. And so, ironically, peace feels like pressure. Let's imagine something simple. You wake up one morning, and for the first time in a long time, you feel calm. You slept. You're safe. There's no immediate fire to put out. And yet, you feel restless. A little voice starts asking, "Did you forget something? Why aren't you panicking?" This doesn't feel normal. And it's not. Because for years, your nervous system was trained to see chaos as home. Now that the noise is gone, you're not sure if you're relaxed or just exposed. This is one of the strangest parts of healing. When you stop sabotaging your life, you don't feel powerful right away. You feel disoriented, like you've stepped into a room you don't recognize. The room is quiet, clean, even warm. But you can't relax because you keep waiting for the floor to collapse. This is the first test. And it's not a test you pass with action. It's a test you pass with patience. Your nervous system needs time to learn. That calm is not a trap. That joy doesn't have to be earned. That quiet doesn't mean abandonment. It means safety. Carl Jung spoke often about individuation, not becoming someone else, but becoming more fully who you are. And part of that process is learning to sit in this new, quiet room without running back to the fire. Let's pause here and bring in a story, not a dramatic one, a small, ordinary tale, the kind that feels familiar. There was once a boy who lived near a cliff. Every morning, he would walk a narrow path along its edge to bring water back to his family. He had done this since he was 6. The wind, the rocks, the silence, it was all normal to him. But one day, the government built a bridge, safe, wide, guardrails and all. Everyone in the village started using it. But the boy, he still walked the cliff path, not because he was stubborn, because it felt right. He knew the weight of each stone, the rhythm of the wind. The bridge felt too safe, too quiet, too strange. Until one day, a storm knocked loose a boulder. It blocked the cliff path. With no other choice, he crossed the bridge. And halfway across, he froze. His body tensed. His breath shortened. He was afraid of nothing. There was no wind, no danger, but he wasn't used to it. He finished crossing with a pounding heart and shaking hands. The next day, he used the bridge again and again. Each time, the shaking lessened, not because the fear disappeared, but because his body learned something new. Safety can be learned. Peace can be practiced. And change doesn't mean death. It just means your body needs time to catch up with your spirit. That's the second stage of healing sabotage. Not leaping into joy, but letting yourself stand on the bridge. Not sprinting to success, but sitting in the quiet without sabotaging it. There will be days where the old path calls, where you miss the chaos, the urgency, the fire. That doesn't mean you're broken. It means you're healing. Because now, you know the difference. You can feel the edge of the cliff, and you can feel the ground beneath the bridge. And even if it's unfamiliar, you know which one gives you life. As your patterns begin to shift, so do the people around you. And not everyone will celebrate it. Because when you stop sabotaging yourself, you stop needing certain roles. The helper, the fixer, the listener, the quiet one. And when those roles fade, the dynamics that depended on them start to tremble. Carl Jung spoke often of the collective unconscious, the invisible web that connects our behavior to others' expectations. And when you gently step out of your old pattern, the web tugs. Some people tighten their grip. They miss the version of you who always said yes, who stayed small, who stayed silent. They'll ask if you're okay. They'll say you've changed. They might say it like a compliment, but sometimes they won't. Because your growth makes their comfort feel uncertain. Not because you're wrong, but because you're no longer playing a role that kept them safe. This is the cost of healing. Sometimes you lose relationships that were built on your inability to say no. And that loss, while painful, is also the beginning of a deeper connection with people who love the real you, not the version who performs, pleases, or pretends. Let's slow down for a moment. Breathe gently. And picture this. Imagine a woman named Mira. For years, she was the dependable one, the one who picked up the phone at midnight, the one who stayed late to help, the one who made herself small so others could breathe. She never asked for anything, never complained, never cried where anyone could see, until one day she couldn't keep it up. She got quiet, started setting boundaries, said no, softly, but clearly. And that's when it began. One friend stopped calling. Another said she was acting distant. Her own family asked if she was going through something. She was. She was going through herself. And on the other side of it, she found something beautiful. One friend stayed. Just one. But that friend said something she'd never heard before. I'm glad you're taking care of yourself. I'm not going anywhere. That's the kind of connection self-sabotage hides from us. We think we need to keep performing to be loved. But love that depends on performance isn't love. It's obligation. It's control. Real love survives your truth. And sometimes it only shows up after you stop sabotaging. Jung would call this individuation through relationship. Yourself becomes real in the presence of others, not in hiding from them. But not all others can handle your truth. And that's okay. Some connections will fall away. Let them, because the ones who remain will meet you where you truly are. No masks, no roles, no sabotage, just quiet understanding. And that kind of love feels different. It doesn't chase. It doesn't test. It doesn't demand a version of you that isn't real. It just sits beside you and stays. You've stopped the sabotage. You've set the boundaries. You've walked away from roles that drained you. And now, there's quiet. But not the peaceful kind you expected. It feels hollow. Like something's missing. Like you're floating. This is one of the most misunderstood parts of healing. People assume growth feels empowering, like rising, like clarity. But sometimes it just feels like nothing. Because for years, your pain had a shape. It filled your time. It gave you purpose. It even gave you an identity. The one who always fixes things. The one who sacrifices. The one who survives. Now, without the sabotage, you're left with space. And space can feel terrifying. Carl Jung warned about this phase in the individuation process, the descent into the unconscious, where you're no longer who you were, but not yet who you'll become. This is the in-between. It's not regression. It's not depression. It's detox. Your body, your nervous system, your habits, they're all adjusting to a world where you no longer operate from fear or performance. And the silence? That's your mind finally catching its breath. But breath can feel like suffocation when you're not used to having it. Let's pause here for a story. A short one. Maybe one you've lived through in your own way. There was once a man who carried a heavy stone. He picked it up in childhood. No one told him to. He just believed it was his job to carry it. It weighed on his back, strained his muscles, made him strong in a way that broke him. He crossed rivers, climbed hills, lived years, always with the stone. Then, one day, someone asked, "Why do you carry that?" And he didn't have an answer. So he put it down. And in that moment, he didn't feel free. He felt lost. His back ached differently. His walk felt strange. His arms moved without weight, and that lightness felt like weakness. Because when the burden is all you've known, peace can feel like absence. But he kept walking. And step by step, his body remembered what it meant to move freely, to stretch, to breathe, to exist without pain as proof. That's what healing sabotage feels like. You put the stone down, and for a while, you miss it. Not because it was good, but because it was familiar. Don't mistake emptiness for failure. That hollow space you feel, it's not a void. It's a womb. Something new is forming. But before it arrives, you have to learn how to sit in the quiet, how to stop filling every silence with self-blame, how to let your new self emerge without rushing it into form. Jung often said that people don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This emptiness is not darkness. It's the space you've cleared by removing false identities. And now, your soul is asking, what do you want to plant here? Not what others want, not what fear demands, but what your truest self needs. Maybe it's rest. Maybe it's art. Maybe it's love that doesn't ask you to shrink. Whatever it is, it won't show up overnight. And that's okay. Because now, you're no longer blocking the door with your own fear. You're standing in a new room. It's quiet, unfurnished, but open. And that's the beginning of freedom. Now that you've put the burden down and you're standing in this strange, quiet room within yourself, a question naturally follows. What now? You see, healing doesn't end with the decision to stop sabotaging. That's just the door. What happens next is the slow, quiet forming of something new. And this new self doesn't announce itself loudly. It whispers. It shows up in small decisions, in how you speak to yourself when no one else is around, in whether you rush to fill an awkward silence or sit with it, in whether you punish yourself for feeling tired or let yourself rest. Carl Jung believed that true transformation happens when the unconscious is made conscious, not with fireworks, but with repetition. So the work ahead isn't dramatic, it's consistent. Like watering a plant you can't yet see sprouting. Let's take a moment to picture someone, maybe someone like you. She wakes up in the morning, not with a sudden burst of joy, but with a slightly gentler thought than usual. Instead of saying, "I'm already behind," she whispers, "Let's just begin." That's a shift. When she spills coffee, instead of spiraling into self-blame, she laughs. Another shift. When a friend doesn't text back right away, her chest still tightens. But she doesn't invent a story. She just lets it be. That's the brain rewiring. Every time you act with more compassion toward yourself, even slightly, your brain carves a new groove, a new path. a new possibility. Self-sabotage didn't build itself in one day, and it won't unravel in one night. It's the result of years of unconscious training. So healing must be a form of retraining, one kind moment at a time. This is where habits come in, not the kind that scream productivity, but the quiet rituals that tell your nervous system, you're safe now. Things like sitting with your tea and actually tasting it, writing a single sentence in a journal, not to impress, just to hear yourself, breathing for 5 seconds before responding to a message. These aren't big acts, but they become sacred when done with intention. And over time, they become proof to your inner world that you are no longer at war with yourself. That's all self-sabotage ever was. A civil war inside the psyche. One part trying to move forward, another trying to protect the wounds. Healing is peace negotiation. You listen to both parts. You hold space for fear, but you gently let love lead. Here's something most people don't realize. You don't need to feel ready to start a new pattern. You just need to begin. The feeling of readiness often comes after the action, not before. When you speak kindly to yourself, even though it feels fake, you're rewiring. When you don't cancel plans just because anxiety showed up, you're rewiring. When you admit you're overwhelmed instead of pretending you're fine, you're rewiring. And slowly, the self that once only existed as an idea becomes reality. Jung would call this the birth of the true self from within the shadow. You're no longer living through projections, defense mechanisms, or inherited roles. You're living quietly, softly, bravely. Most people think self-sabotage lives in the mind, that it's just about beliefs, thoughts, or mental habits. But Carl Jung and others knew something deeper. The body keeps score. Even when your conscious mind forgets the wound, your muscles remember. Your breathing remembers. Your posture remembers. You flinch before you speak your truth. You shrink slightly when receiving love. You clench when nothing is wrong. Because somewhere, long ago, that response kept you safe. The body learns patterns, not by logic, but by repetition. If you grew up in chaos, your body associates calm with danger. If you grew up unseen, your nervous system scans every room for rejection. So when you finally begin to heal, it's not just the mind that resists. It's the body. Healing, then, isn't just about new thoughts. It's about helping the body feel safe enough to soften. Take a moment. How are you sitting right now? Are your shoulders tense? Is your jaw tight? Are you holding your breath without realizing? That's not failure. That's memory. It's your body remembering what it once needed to survive. And now, you get to teach it something new. Not by yelling affirmations, not by forcing yourself to just relax, but by slowly, patiently offering it safety. Start small. Drop your shoulders when you notice they're tense. Place your hand over your heart when anxiety rises. Breathe in deeply, not to perform calmness, but to invite it. Your nervous system doesn't respond to words. It responds to consistency. When you choose to respond gently to a trigger, when you pause instead of spiraling, when you rest without guilt, your body begins to believe maybe the danger is gone. And in that moment, healing deepens. Jung often spoke of the body as a gateway to the unconscious. Dreams, instincts, reactions, they all rise from the same deep source. That's why real healing often happens below the surface, not in grand realizations, but in the quiet rewiring of sensation. A therapist once told a client, "It's not just that you believe you don't deserve love, it's that your body braces every time someone offers it." And the client cried, not because it was new, but because it was finally named. This is why healing can feel exhausting. You're not just changing thoughts, you're undoing years of embodied fear. And that takes time. But there's good news. The body is resilient. It remembers pain, but it can also remember peace. And just like trauma can be stored, so can trust. You build it day by day, moment by moment, choice by choice. Each time you choose gentleness over judgment, each time you let yourself be instead of do. You're teaching your body. This is a safe place now. Here's one of the most painful truths in the healing process. Sometimes, the very thing we want the most, love, connection, safety, is the thing we push away. Not because we don't want it, but because somewhere deep in our history, it became dangerous. Carl Jung would call this the shadow of love. It's not that we're afraid of being unloved. We're afraid of what love might cost. Maybe you had to earn love by pleasing everyone. Maybe love came with violence, silence, or sudden withdrawal. Maybe when you finally felt seen, someone used it against you. So your system adapted. You learned how to survive without softness. You learned how to be strong instead of open, how to entertain instead of connect, how to read a room before you read your own needs. And now, you meet someone who sees you, someone who offers calm, someone who gives without asking you to shrink. But something in you pulls away. You overthink, you doubt, you sabotage. Why? Because your nervous system says, "We've been here before. This is where we got hurt." And even though this love is different, your body doesn't know that yet. So it reacts to now with the fear of then. That's not weakness. That's protection. But protection can become a prison. So how do we stop pushing love away? By learning to sit with the discomfort of being loved well. It sounds simple, but it's not easy. When someone offers you consistency, your first instinct might be suspicion. When someone asks how you are and actually listens, you might feel exposed. When someone doesn't leave after seeing your mess, you might feel like you owe them something. Or worse, you might wait for the punishment. Because love, to your old self, was never just love. It was followed by shame, by silence, by disappearance. So now, receiving love feels like walking into a room without armor. But here's the secret. The more you stay in that room, the more your system learns a new lesson. Love doesn't always leave. It doesn't always demand. It doesn't always punish. Sometimes it just stays. And over time, your fear relaxes. Not because it was wrong, but because it's finally safe enough to rest. Jung spoke about this as integrating the shadow. To fully receive love, you must also love the part of you that fears it. The part that hesitates. The part that questions. The part that still carries old wounds. Don't shame those parts. Hold them. Speak to them. Let them come forward in relationships, not to ruin them, but to be healed within them. And if you're single, this still applies. Because every moment you choose to care for yourself with gentleness, you're practicing how to receive love. You're setting the tone. You're teaching your system that connection is possible without betrayal, without shrinking, without becoming someone else.